So today's lesson is part 2 of finding equations of lines from 2 points. So I just picked this background slide of the roads because when you have 2 coordinates, it's important that you get the right line and you don't find the coordinate of a wrong line. Here is some review. So today's lesson is just so much like part 1. If you're really good with part 1, today's lesson is going to go by nice and quick and smoothly for you. Reminder number 1. Go back through your notes from the beginning of the year to practice operations with rationals. Yes, we're working with fractions today, also known as fractions. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. Make sure you can perform all those operations because we are working with fractions today. Reminder number 2, this is the big one from this unit. To find the equation of the line, you need to know both of the slope and the y-intercept because our equation is y equals mx plus b. To find the slope, you can count it out on a grid with rise over run, or you can use the slope formula. So if I were using this graph right here, and I'm going to try counting it out with the graph. So I'm going to put 2 points on here that look pretty clear. This one is 3, 1. And how about this one here is 6, negative 1. So I draw a triangle like this, and rise over run. In this case, this is negative coming down this way, so it's going to be a fall of how many units? That's 2 units, so it's a fall of 2, which means the slope, the numerator is going to be a minus 2 over a run of 1, 2, 3. So it looks like my slope is negative 2/3. That's one way to get it. Another way is I could have subbed into my formula here. This would be my x1, y1, x2, y2. To find b, we can look at the graph. Sometimes it's not really accurate when you look at the graph, but this one is pretty good here. If the graph isn't accurate like what we have, we could find it by subbing into the equation. But right here, I think my y-intercept is pretty clear. It looks like it's a 3, so my b value is a 3. So to come up with the equation of this graph, I would write y equals negative 2/3 x plus 3. So that's kind of the easy way when your graph looks nice and clear, and it's easy to find the values just by looking at it, get the rise and the run, and then find the y-intercept, and there's your equation really quick. So that's when we first learned about y equals mx plus b, that's how we did it. But now we have ways to sub in to find the equation when we don't have a nice tidy graph line like we do here. We only have one example today. This is it, and of course it's a fraction one. Find the equation of the line passing through a and b, and look at those numbers. First of all, let's do a rough sketch. What would this look like? And I don't need to do this sketch, but I'm going to because it'll help me just check later. So my points are kind of weird, right? Negative 3, 7. So I'm just going to go over negative 1, negative 2, negative 3 like that. And 3 looks like it's basically my biggest number. So I'm going to do 3 all the way. 3, 1, 2, 3. And you don't have to do this. And if you have it on a test, though, I'd recommend you just even do it on your scrap paper if you want, just so that you have a little gauge to go by. So I'm going to graph first A. A is negative 3 and 7 over 3. How do I graph 7 over 3? So 7 over 3 is a mixed number, is 2 1/3. That's 7 over 3. Or if it's hard for you to even picture a third on a graph, that's 2.3 repeating. So I would try to graph 2.3. So first I go negative 3 along my x-axis to negative 3, and then I'm going to go up 2.3 roughly. Total rough sketch here, right? Nobody's holding me to this. My other point is 1/2 and negative 1/3, so 1/2 is the same as 0.5, and negative 1/3 is negative 0.3. So I'm going to go over a half. This is about a half here. I'm kind of coloring it in. Going over a half, and I'm going down negative 0.3. That's just a little bit. I'm just going down a little tiny amount here, a third of the way down, about there. So I'm going to put my dot right there. I'm going to draw a line through that. It almost, my line that I'm going to draw, it looks like it's going to go right through the origin actually. So if it does go through the origin, that would mean our y-intercept is 0, but we'll see. So let's just draw a line here. And I'm going to put that to the side now. I'm going to forget about that. I'm just going to come back to that again at the end. Well, I'll come back to it partway through as well. So let me erase some of these little marks I put here. So that was my step 1, was a rough sketch. Step 2, of course, is the slope and y-intercept formula. So slope y-intercept formula is y equals mx plus b. What can I put in there? Y equals mx plus b. First thing is the slope, always the slope. I'm not going to use my graph here and try to count out slopes using thirds and halves and all that. I'm going to calculate it using my slope formula. So there it is up here. I'm going to do the slope on the side, and then when I figure it out, I'll come back to my equation and sub it in. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. What's what? And you've heard me say this many times. I'm going to take the 5 seconds it takes to label these x1, y1, x2, y2, and that way I won't mess that up. And those are some complicated looking numbers, right? So I put them in. Look at what that looks like. That is a mess. We're not actually allowed to have all these levels of fractions here. So I'm going to have to change this line to a division symbol. And this is going to be one part in brackets. Then I'm going to put a divided by sign here. And then in the other brackets, I'll put the denominator. So it's going to look like this. I went ahead, these have a common denominator of 3, so I skipped a bit of a step there. And these two negatives make a positive. So I got rid of my multi-levels of fractions, which is important. My numerator, of course, is going to simplify easily. I already have a common denominator there. 1/2 plus 3. So hopefully some of us are good enough with fractions that we know if you have a half and then you have 3 wholes, you're going to have 3 1/2, right? You're just going to have 3 1/2. But if you're not there yet, then you need a common denominator. So the parts in red are the kind of the next steps. So this is my numerator. So I'm changing 3 to 6 over 2. That's the same thing, so that I have a common denominator. Then I add those and I get 7 over 2. So I've got -8/3 divided by 7 over 2. The way we divide fractions is actually to change this to multiplication and flip or invert our second fraction. So I'll do that, and I have -8/3 times 2/7. And let me just do my next step here. Remember, we multiply numerator times numerator, so that's going to give us, and we have one negative sign, a 16. And denominator times denominator, we multiply these two together, 21. So there's my slope. So that was a bit complicated. If you're just watching along and you're just passively listening and looking at what I'm doing, that's not good enough. So what you should do is really press pause here and do that slope yourself, because the whole point of today's lesson really is working with fractions. So do that yourself, see if you can get 16 over 21. And if you're not even willing to do that much, at least press pause right now and try to finish the question yourself. So just sitting back and passively watching and listening is not learning. You should be doing this actively along with me. So there's my slope substituted into the equation. What's the next step? Do you remember? So don't wait for me to tell you, think of it yourself. What is the next step? It's to find B. So how do we find B? Again, don't always just wait in the videos for the answer to be told to you. Press pause and think about it. How do I find B? And then I'll tell you. We sub in a point. So we pick whatever point we like best from our two choices up here. I picked this one. -3 is the x, it goes there, in for x. 7 over 3 is the y, it goes in there for the y. And we are going to work this out now. That gives me 7 over 3 here equals, so I'm going to do some canceling to make my life easier here. This is over an invisible 1. And I can take, when I look at these two pieces here that I'm supposed to be multiplying together, instead of figuring out 16 times 3 and then having that over 21, I'm going to reduce it right here. I'm going to divide a numerator, a top part by 3. That's going to give me a -1. Divide a denominator by 3. That gives me a 7. So what I have here, and I had 2 negatives there and there, so I'm getting 16. I kind of made my circle too big. Let me erase that big circle. I've got 16 over 7 plus b. Now, if I lost you there with that canceling, then you need to go and multiply straight across the top, straight across the bottom, and just multiply and then reduce. Okay, next step, I want to get this 16 over 7 over onto this side with the other constant. So I do that by subtracting 7/3 minus 16 over 7 equals b. Now we need a common denominator. That common denominator. So again, you're thinking, you're not just sitting there and like I'm telling a story and you're waiting for the ending. You are figuring it out yourself. What's the common denominator? 21. 21. So how do I get my numerators? Okay, I multiplied 3 by 7 to get to 21. Now I have to do the same to the top. That's going to give me a 49. And on the other side, I multiplied 7 by 3 to get to a 21. Do the same to the top, and I get a 48. So I have 1 over 21 equals b. So the equation I get is, I'll put it right here, y equals -16 over 21x. Remember, your final equation needs an x and it needs a y, plus 1 over 21. So does that make sense with the little graph that I gave myself just so I could check here? Look at that y-intercept, 1 over 21. That's really close to 0, 121. And that looks pretty good with what I've done, right? That's a really small number there, and that looks good. Remember, I thought it was going to go right through the origin almost. So that's pretty close to 0. So that was a good guess there. And -16 over 21, well, that number is a little harder to determine for sure, but what I can tell is it's definitely negative because it's going in that direction. And -16 over 21 is less than 1, so it's not going to be very steep, and it's not very steep. It's relatively flat. So I think my answer is probably correct because I have my little rough sketch here to check with. And that's it. That's the end of the lesson. It's all the steps you know, and they should be coming to you quite quickly, the steps. You should know what to do first, second, and third. And it's just working with fractions today. That was our extra practice bit, was to work with fractions. So that's it. That's your lesson. 13 minutes.